What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review the new Korean horror film, Peninsula, which is being released by a couple different names. The official name in America is Train to Busan Presents Peninsula. Some people are calling it Train to Busan 2. I think in South Korea it's just being called Peninsula. But this is the sequel to the 2016 film Train to Busan, and not to worry, because this film's not coming out for a couple more days in the US, this review will be spoiler free. However, it's been kind of a weird thing figuring out when to review this movie because it's had a massively staggered release due to the season of the virus. It was already a huge hit theatrically in South Korea. It got released in Canada a couple weeks ago. And it was due to come out in America a while back, but after multiple delays, it's finally getting a limited theatrical as well as a VOD release this Friday, August 21st. But when it comes to the various subgenres of horror, it's hard to think of something that's more played out than zombies. They've got a massive overexposure problem right now across film, television, video games, comics, you name it. That said, when you get a good one, it's really special. I mean, I'm talking about George A. Romero's original zombie trilogy, or really fucked up comics like Crossed, which I should warn is absolutely not for the faint of heart. Crossed might be one of the most disturbing comics that's ever been written or conceived by a human being. And then you've got highlights from the world of video games like Resident Evil 4, which I basically couldn't come up for air for a couple of months until I'd cleared it many times over. And then, of course, you've got great comedies like Shaun of the Dead. But I would also add to this Hall of Fame list the 2016 film Train to Busan from director Sang Ho-yeon, if I'm saying that correctly, who also directed this latest film, Peninsula. I think Train to Busan is one of the best horror films of the last decade, and if you haven't seen it, I strongly encourage everybody to stop right now and go check it out on Netflix. And prior to seeing Train to Busan, I didn't think it was possible for the tired zombie genre to feel so fresh and new again. In particular, the little details, just the way the zombies come to life, the way they rise up in this really eerie fashion, the way they move, the way they change. With that movie, director Sang Ho-yeon accomplished the impossible by making the zombie genre just feel exciting again. And for my money, it was almost as exciting as when Danny Boyle unleashed 28 Days Later on us back in the early 2000s, which in my opinion is the movie that was directly responsible for resurrecting the zombie genre for the 21st century, which is why you've had all these other things like the Dawn of the Dead remake, shows like Walking Dead, etc., so on and so forth. But enough delaying the inevitable, it's time for me to actually talk about this latest movie, Peninsula, and I'm going to come out right and say it. I don't think it's as strong or as memorable as Train to Busan, and when it comes to horror, terror, fear, etc., all the emotions that we pay to see with a horror film, I don't think Peninsula even comes close to Train to Busan. However, to be fair, I think this movie will find an audience because it's not really going for a horror vibe. It's going for a very different kind of style, because this is not a movie about a zombie outbreak. This is set 4 years after the first movie, where you basically have the South Korean peninsula in complete and total quarantine from the rest of the world. And forgetting for a moment all topicality and current events from the season of the virus, Peninsula is going for a style of storytelling that's much more rooted in action, dystopian sci-fi. It has a hell of a lot more in common with a movie like John Carpenter's Escape from New York or George Miller's The Road Warrior than it does with any traditional horror films. There are zombies aplenty scattered throughout this movie, but I have to admit by the end of the movie, I don't think I'd been scared a single time, whereas with the first movie, I was genuinely freaked out on multiple occasions. But I think there's a chance that some hardcore zombie fans out there are going to take an interest, because once you've seen all the established classics over and over again, what you start to look for are unique and interesting scenarios into which you can insert zombies, with the goal being that you hopefully come up with something as fresh and original as like Return of the Living Dead, which married punk rock and comedy and sex and all these wonderful ingredients and gave us something that felt truly unique. And with Peninsula, you essentially have a heist film set in a dystopian horror, sci-fi, zombie apocalypse, where a group's being hired to go back into South Korea to try to retrieve this truck that has tons of money in it, with the assumption being that the entire Korean peninsula at this point is just overrun with zombies and nothing else. And as we learned in the film Train to Busan, the zombies in this setting, while they might be really fast, really aggressive, really dangerous, they're also basically blind in the dark. So the goal is to sneak into South Korea at night, steal the money, meet a boat, get the hell out of there, with no real opposition to worry about. But of course, as any fan of zombie films knows, the real threat in a zombie apocalypse is not the zombies. The real threat in a zombie apocalypse is your fellow human beings fighting to survive. And while the outside world might not know it, there are plenty of people that are still alive in South Korea who are basically living in this Mad Max world with an alarming scarcity of resources, food, etc. They're all battling to survive. They've cooked up truly horrific new forms of entertainment, as can be seen in the trailer. And then, of course, you always have to worry about human error, because no matter how carefully you might lay your plans for a big heist adventure scenario, all it takes is one person making a mistake with noise, and of course you're going to wake up millions upon millions of zombies. So if you've seen the trailer, you already know this. But of course, everything goes to hell. The heist is a total disaster. Our characters get split up between the various factions that are competing with each other in the peninsula. On one hand, you've got people who just want to get out. On the other hand, you've got this new military faction that's basically ruling over their territory like totalitarian warlords. And I will say this in the movie's defense. It presents us with imagery that I've never seen before in a horror film. When our characters first return, at one point they see this giant glass hallway that's kind of permanently set at this 45-degree angle, filled with writhing zombies. And in this world, the zombies don't really need any fuel. They're basically immortal once they become zombies. So they're still writhing and freaking out, trapped in this scenario. And of course, those trapped zombies will pay dividends later in the movie. But the main draw for watching this movie is to see these new elaborate games that have emerged for people's entertainment. And this is not a spoiler because it's featured heavily in the trailer. But basically with these new military warlords, in order to keep their men entertained and subdued, they put on these games that are basically like American Ninja Warrior mixed with the UFC, mixed with American Gladiators. Like, pick any kind of extreme entertainment you can think of. And in this movie, you basically have people who have fallen out of favor, who are thrown into this pit, who have to fight for their lives. And much like a shot clock in a basketball game, you have this timer that's ticking down. And if you survive, maybe if you're lucky, you'll get some food, but you'll probably have to fight for that food with your fellow survivors. And one of the main drivers of the plot is the fact that one of our central characters who's participating in the heist, he is trapped competing in these games, and his friend and ally who's with the opposite faction is going to try to find a way to break him out before they try to escape from the peninsula with all the cash in hand. So there's plenty of action scattered throughout. There's plenty of violence scattered throughout. There's plenty of gore scattered throughout. If you want to see people with machine guns taking on hordes of zombies, this movie absolutely delivers. Probably 1,000 times more action than anyone could ever want. But like I said before, none of it's particularly scary. This is a movie that's more about thrills. There's a giant chase scene at the end, which a lot of people are going to try and compare to Mad Max Fury Road or The Road Warrior and things like that. This movie doesn't really have the budget to compete on that level. However, if you like post-apocalyptic car chases where you've got people fighting to the death while surrounded by zombies, this movie absolutely delivers on that front as well. But maybe this movie failed on one level because I wasn't quite as attached to the characters. I'd never seen either of these actors before, but the movie stars Jung Hyun Lee, if I'm saying that correctly, and Dong Won Gang. They're both really good, but most of the characters scattered throughout this drama feel pretty one-note, one-dimensional. They've got their one little role to play, and they don't really deviate. So whether a character is a benevolent uncle or a sassy child, or whatever the case might be, they're not really developed that much more beyond just a generic stereotype. But if my tone sounds overly critical, I will admit I did enjoy this movie. I was engaged with this movie. I had no problem paying attention from start to finish. We have almost no new movies to watch right now, so perhaps I'm an easy mark. I think diehard horror and sci-fi fans should absolutely take a look. Just go into it knowing that Train to Busan's up here and Peninsula's down here, and that's just a sad reality that we're going to have to live with. But I think that's about all I can say without going into heavy spoilers, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Whatever director Sang Ho Yeon does in the future, at a minimum, I'll be curious because, like I said, I think Train to Busan is one of the best horror films of the last decade, so he's definitely got my attention. He just didn't quite completely deliver on the same level with this particular movie, but who knows, maybe his next movie will be the best movie he's ever made. But that's all I got to say for now. So if you want to talk more about horror films or Asian horror films or whatever the case might be, you can hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax or leave me a comment in the comments below. But please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. I would really appreciate it. But I hope everyone has a great day. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.